apology. Sorry for the disjointed nature of this class. In its original inception, the Tuesdays in March looked pretty good, and then all of a sudden my life wasn't cooperating more than anything. So here we are. It's been a while since our first class. I want to kind of backtrack a little bit, and then we're going to move forward. And I want to backtrack by starting with the difference between secular time and mystical time. So when we think of secular time, we think in terms of a calendar, moving from January to December, year after year, almost in kind of what we would identify as this timeline of things, beginning with birth and ending with death. And that's our kind of understanding of the secular time as we've come to appreciate it. But the problem with secular time is that it doesn't always mesh well when you're seeking something more in life. And so the mystics had a concept of mystical time, meaning that life was a series of, let's say, concentric experiences. And none of them were disconnected from another. In other words, what happened here, you move on to the next stage, and the next stage, and the next stage. Some things accumulate, but most of all, we grow out of a stage and move to the next stage. So it's very rare that you'll find a 60-year-old man reading a comic book from their youth, unless they happen to be a collector. Although today I was very depressed because I heard that Archie, the comic book from the 1940s, they're killing him off. They're killing off Archie. And in the new issue, he's going to die. Terrible. But secular time kind of moves from point A to point B and doesn't really draw a lot of experience along with it. Mystical time tends to move out in waves and duplicates itself over and over again, so that the concentric moments of time drag experiences through time. And the interesting thing about mystical time is that it moves forward and backward. And the mystic is constantly reliving time, not just experiencing something, putting that in his pocket or writing about it in their journal and moving on to another experience. They're trying to experience things over and over and over again. I use this image of a diamond. It's like trying to look at the different facets of a diamond and to appreciate the light within the diamond. You turn the diamond to each of the facets and you see a different light each time. It's the same diamond, but it's a different light. And that's the mystical experience of trying not only to see all the myriad differences of light, but to see the same light twice. So if you look at a diamond and you see the light, you will never see that same light again because the sun's at a different angle or lamp you're using to refract the light is a little different wattage. So that light which you see is always different. The mystic's trying to recreate the original experience. And so understanding time in a different kind of plane or relationship is really important. And so the mystic is trying to have an ineffable experience that he can relate. Now that's the opposite. Right. So that's kind of a conflict. An indescribable experience that he can talk about. All right? Now how does that happen? Can you imagine an indescribable experience that you were talking about?
It would be indescribable. You know, you can certainly have a very moving experience, something that you might consider great, wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about. But indescribable seems to transcend that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we talked about this movie, Noah. I'm going to use a scene from that movie. So Noah has a child, a son. His oldest son is out in the field with him. His son is still really young, probably 5 or 6 years old. And his son, they're gathering berries or nuts or fruits or something to eat. And they only gather what they can consume, never any extra. And there's this beautiful white flower growing just in the dirt. And the son kind of looks at it, and then he plucks it. And the father says, "What did you do?" And the son said, "It's a beautiful flower. I wanted to save it." And Noah says, "We only save what we can consume, and we never tear down creation for our own enjoyment." And like a drop of divine tear falls from the sky and plops on the ground, and immediately a new flower springs out. Okay? And Noah doesn't talk about the event until much later in the movie. And he realizes that that was an ineffable moment, an indescribable moment of God's providence. Now it's kitsch and it's Hollywood and it's not in the biblical narrative at all, and those things never happened. But whoever read the story may have understood something important about the righteousness of Noah. And they made Noah out to be incredibly righteous and then incredibly self-righteous, almost. So he was a wise man. He had this sense of creation, but then he became so zealous in fulfilling God's command that he lost sight of the real purpose. So he gets drunk and all this other stuff. But this moment of ineffability is important for the mystic. And if they had an ineffable moment when they were totally alone, there would be no way for them to relate that moment to anyone else. The thing that separates Jewish mysticism from all other forms of mysticism is the idea of a minion. The mystics, the Jewish mystics, never had a mystical experience alone. They always had mystical experiences surrounded by their students or their colleagues, that it was almost a group effort for a single person to have that experience. And then, as they were in their experience, talking to themselves about what they were seeing, all the people around them were writing it down. And that's how we get the record of Jewish mystical testimonies, because of the students gathered around a person to have so that they could have their mystical experience. Judaism rejected very early on the old man on the mountain model, where you climb into a cave and shut yourself off. Now it happens once there are a couple of people in Jewish tradition that did that. But they're not the mystical masters that we're looking at when we look at mystical texts. The people that we look at when we look at mystical texts are those who had their experience, their moment, their whatever it was, but they were surrounded by people. What is that experience based on? So tonight's topic is really about vision. So if you've ever gotten an email from me, you know my tagline, Ve'ein chazon yipara'am, where there is no vision, the people perish. It's a quote from the book of Proverbs, chapter 29, verse 18. And for the better part of my rabbinic journey, that's been kind of my mantra. It's all about vision, looking ahead, for trying to deepen our relationship. So vision is important. And it was very funny. The cantor and I were laughing because when I first became the interim here, I'd sent him an email and it had that tagline, Ba'ein chazon yipara'am. Well, he saw it and it said, where there is no cantor, Ba'ein chazon yipara'am, the people perish.
That's funny.
I said, no, that's not what it said. So what I want to do tonight is I want to look at some mystical journeys, some experience, some vision. And probably the most important one in all of mystical tradition is the vision of Ezekiel. It is also the most bizarre. Between Ezekiel, Isaiah, and Daniel, these are our three visions that kind of become intertwined into the mystical experience. So the first one we're going to look at is Ezekiel, and it's in last week's pack, or last time's pack. So if we go to Ezekiel, looks like that. So when does this vision happen? Ezekiel tells us it's in the 30th year of the exile from Jerusalem to Babylonia. The Hebar Canal is the canal where the Jews lived in Babylonian exile, off the Euphrates River. So, in the 30th year, on the 5th day of the 4th month, when I was in the community of exiles by the Hebar Canal, the heavens opened, and I saw visions of God. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin. The word of the Lord came to the priest Ezekiel, son of Buzi, by the Hebar Canal, in the land of the Chaldeans, and the hand of the Lord came upon him there. So this is Ezekiel's moment. I looked, and lo, a stormy wind came sweeping out of the north. So wind is really important in all mystical testimonies. Wind. Sweeping out of the north is important. Why? If you looked at Jerusalem as a fortress, the only side upon which Jerusalem was vulnerable was the north. And so a wind blowing from the north signified that this was a vulnerable moment. Why is Jerusalem vulnerable from the north? Because it's built at the end of a plateau on top of a hill. And on the east and west, the hill slopes very, very dramatically down, and on the south as well, towards the Dead Sea. But on the north side of Jerusalem, it is a plateau that heads back towards the central plain of Israel. And so militarily, if you ever wanted to attack Jerusalem, you always attacked from the north. But so there's a stormy wind came sweeping out of the north, a huge cloud, flashing fire, surrounded by radiance, and in the center of it, in the center of the fire, a gleam as of amber. So this is another important image, that which is coming is all about light and glowing and radiance, which one would traditionally identify as God. So, God was in the pillar of fire, the pillar of cloud, burning bush. These are all very divinely centered images. So, and in the center of this fire, here's where it gets great, guys, were the figures of 4 creatures, and this was their appearance. They each had the figures of human beings, however, each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings, and the legs of each were fused into a single rigid leg, and the feet of each were like a single calf's foot, and their sparkle was like the luster of burnished bronze. They had human hands below their wings. The 4 of them had their faces and their wings on their 4 sides. Each one's wings touched those of the other. They did not turn when they moved. Each could move in the direction of any of its faces. Each of them had a human face at the front. Each of the 4 had the face of a lion on the right. Each of the 4 had the face of an ox on the left. And each of the 4 had the face of an eagle at the back. Such were their faces. So everyone seeing this in their mind's eye, pretty amazing eschatological imagery of this creature that had 4 faces and wings and hands and 1 leg, and it's a pretty bizarre image, and it's not the only time we'll hear it. So as for their wings, they were separated above. Each had 2 touching those of the others, while the other 2 covered its body, and each could move in the direction of any of its faces. They went wherever the Spirit impelled them to go, without turning when they moved. So, each of these creatures and their amazing, bizarre descriptiveness had will. because they moved in a direction where their spirit impelled them to go. So the will is important.
They're not angels.
Right. They have independent purpose. They're not being guided by something. Right? So such then was the appearance of the creatures. With them was something that looked like burning coals of fire. This will become interesting with Isaiah. This fire, suggestive of torches, kept moving about among the creatures. The fire had a radiance, and lightning issued from the fire, dashing to and fro among the creatures was something that looked like flares. So again, another image of lots of light, sparks, flames, glowing things, very divinely centered images. Ezekiel continues, as I gazed on the creatures, I saw one wheel on the ground next to each of the four-faced creatures. As for the appearance and structure of the wheels, they gleamed like beryl. All four had the same form. The appearance and structure of each was two wheels cutting through each other. That's going to be important too. And when they moved, each could move in the direction of any of its four quarters. They did not veer when they moved. Their rims were tall and frightening, for the rims of all four were covered all over with eyes.
That's pretty frightening.
All right, it's a very frightening image. And when the creature moved forward, the wheels moved at their sides. And when the creatures were born above the earth, the wheels were born too. Whenever the Spirit impelled them to go, they went. Wherever the Spirit impelled them, and the wheels were born alongside them, for the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. When those moved, these moved, and when those stood still, these stood still, and when those were born above the earth, the wheels were born alongside them. For the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. All right, so now we have a whole new mix into the puzzle. I see I'm losing Barbara a little bit here. So I have to tell you, when I first encountered the story of Ezekiel, because I grew up in a very rational, Reform congregation, didn't teach this stuff at all. I was a freshman at the University of Texas, and I was invited to Cincinnati to this weekend about mysticism. And I was convinced after that weekend that I wanted to know what kind of drugs these guys were on. Because who could write this stuff unless you were tripping on something? Because it sounds like a really bad trip. But, it's a totally different perspective on time, on vision, that empowers the mystic. So, this is really important. Above the heads of the creatures was a form, an expanse, with an awe-inspiring gleam as of crystal was spread out above their heads. Under the expanse, each one had a pair of wings extended toward those of the others, and each had another pair covering its body. When they moved, I could hear the sound of their wings, like the sound of the mighty waters, like the sound of Shaddai, a tumult like the din of an army. When they stood still, they would let their wings droop. From above the expanse, over their heads, they stood still, they would let their wings droop. Okay. Now we have the most important piece. Above the expanse over their heads was the semblance of a throne, in appearance like sapphire, and on top upon the semblance of a throne, there was the semblance of a human form. From what appeared as his loins up, I saw a gleam of amber, what looked like a fire encased in a frame. And from what appeared as his loins down, I saw what looked like fire. There was radiance all about him, like the appearance of the bow which shines in the clouds on the day of rain. Such was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. That was the appearance of the semblance of the presence of the Lord. When I beheld it, I flung myself down on my face, and I heard the voice of someone speaking. So let's talk this through. What do you sense happened to Ezekiel? Other than a psychotic break. He had what mystics would describe as a vision. A vision of the seventh heaven. If there were seven, it was the vision of the place. There is a firmament that he describes. Above the firmament, a throne. On the throne, a figure. Okay? Ezekiel is here. Ezekiel is in the presence of the four creatures. The four creatures are the guardians of this realm. They are there to guide the worthy, Ezekiel, and to prevent the unworthy. And Ezekiel has had what we would call a visionary, mystical journey. Because where it starts is he's down here, just sitting by the side of a river, in Babylonia, in exile. And something happens. And we don't really know what happens because the text doesn't tell us what happens. It puts it in the context of a vision. So the Hebrew word for vision is chazon. And here we use the word, let's see, ve'er marot Elohim. So I saw seeings, like to see seeings of God is or a reflection,
semblances,
of God, and and then it uses that term to see over and over again. But Ezekiel kind of talks about, and as you listen carefully, some kind of transitive experience that brings him all the way up to this place. where he cannot see God. He sees the semblance or the shape of God. But he doesn't see the face of God. He sees the glow, the awesome kind of radiance of God. You know, if we, just, saw this shape radiating, and there's what we would call, the term in Greek is asphaklaria, this veil, this thing that separated Ezekiel and the creatures from God. And that becomes the mystical goal. For all of mystical experience, seeing Ezekiel's radiance of God, not the creatures. The creatures are very fearsome. They appear over and over again in mystical texts as the guardians of the gateways. And their purpose is to destroy anyone who was not prepared for a mystical experience. How could you not be prepared? Well, what if you weren't steeped in the 613 commandments? Because for Jewish mysticism, it begins with an in-depth understanding of the mitzvot. And then this is on top of that. So Madonna would have been terrorized by these things because she had no preparation. She wasn't a mitzvah observer. Right? The reaction to popular mysticism through organizations like the Kabbalah Center in New York and in LA and a couple of other locations is that these are people who are trying to short circuit the system to get to the image, but not through the traditional understandings, without doing the work of mystical learning. And so that's the takeaway.
Right. Some would say that that's dangerous.
Right. So that's Ezekiel. Keep that image in mind. Let's go to Isaiah, who is in today's packet. So it's in this week's packet. It has a number 6 at the top. So, in the year that King Uzziah died. So now if we know what that is. So King Uzziah died in the year 721 BC. So this is first Isaiah. This is the Isaiah that defeats Sennacherib and the Assyrians and turns them away. So Isaiah beheld my Lord seated on a high and lofty throne, and the skirts of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs stood in attendance on him. Each of them had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face. With 2 he covered his legs. And with 2 he would fly. Right? So winged creatures, very similar to Ezekiel. And one would call to the other, this is a famous phrase, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Melech haaretz kevodo. So, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. His presence fills all the earth. The doorposts would shake at the sound of the one who called, and the house Yet my own eyes have beheld the King, Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew over to me with a live coal. Where did the coals come from? Ezekiel talked about the burning coals, and which he taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. He touched it to my lips and declared, now that this has touched your lips, your guilt shall depart and your sin be purged away. I heard the voice of my Lord saying, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And I said, Hineni, shlacheni, here I am, send me. And he said, go and say to that people, famous lines, hear indeed, but do not understand, see indeed, but do not grasp. Dull that people's mind, stop its ears, and seal its eyes, lest seeing with its eyes and hearing with its ears, it also grasp with its mind and repent and save itself. I asked, how long, my Lord? And he replied, till towns lie waste without inhabitants, and houses without people, and the ground lies waste and desolate, for the Lord will banish the population, and deserted sites are many in the midst of the land. But while a tenth part remains in it, it shall repent. It shall be ravaged like the terebinth and the oak, of which stumps are left even when they are felled. Its stump shall be a holy seed. So what do you get from Isaiah?
Well, he's asked to go to the people and prophesy, I guess. And it seems to say that while a tenth part of the people remain and repent, then they'll function as a holy seed for growth. That's what I get.
Okay.
I'm sure it's very profound, but that's what I see.
Margaret, anything? You're at a loss. We've totally left you in the dust.
This is very tough.
Yeah. So Isaiah's image, first of all, he sees the same thing Ezekiel sees. He's in the temple. He's not in the temple of this world. He's in another place, another dimension, another location. He's in the temple of the upper world, if you will. And he sees God sitting in this temple. And the seraphim are in his way. Again, just like the four creatures of Ezekiel. And Isaiah feels that he's in the wrong place because he's not prepared for what he's seeing. And he thinks that his end is very soon. And the angel, these creatures fly at him, touch his lips with the fiery coal from the altar, the same coal that Ezekiel refers to, and he's cleansed and ready for this moment. And then Isaiah is given a task. So his mystical journey has a communication piece. And the communication piece comes from God. So I cut Ezekiel's off, where Ezekiel says he hears the voice. So Isaiah hears the voice too. And Isaiah's voice says, go and tell the people, change your ways. But both God and Isaiah know not everyone's going to change. And what God's promise to Isaiah is if he does this, that 10% will always follow the right path. that no matter what happens, God will never abandon the covenant, that there will always be a remainder, a tenth. Now, it could be more, but there will at least be a tenth. And so Isaiah is told, this is not, you're not Noah, you're not going to go prophesy the end of the world, you're not going to go destroy people, but you're going to give them this message of divine nearness, and then those that follow will follow. So Isaiah's message or image is a little bit more promising than Ezekiel, because Isaiah's first. In the order of visionary images, Isaiah would be first. Ezekiel would be 150 years later. And Daniel's about 100 years after Ezekiel. And so the first image is a soft image. God on the throne, creatures that fly, and then, that you have protection. Ezekiel's image is much harsher. So the creatures that fly get developed into these four-headed monsters. And Daniel's image carries it, a whole new place. Has anyone here ever read the book of Daniel? So Daniel's image, we turn the page, we're gonna read some of this because it's really hard because it's the same image carried to the next level. So we're in chapter 7. In the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and a vision of his mind in bed. Afterward, he wrote down the dream. Beginning the account, Daniel related the following. In my vision at night, I saw the four winds of heaven stirring up the great sea. Four mighty beasts, different from each other, emerged from the sea. The first was a lion, but had eagle's wings. And as I looked on, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted off the ground and set on its feet like a man and given the mind of a man. Then I saw a second different beast, which was like a bear, raised on one side, and with 3 fangs in its mouth among its teeth. It was told, arise, eat much meat. After that I looked on, there was another one like a leopard, and it had on its back 4 wings like those of a bird. The beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After that, as I looked on in the night vision, there was a 4th beast, fearsome, dreadful, and very powerful, with great iron teeth, that devoured and crushed and stamped the remains with its feet. It was different from all the other beasts which had gone before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was gazing upon these horns, a new little horn sprouted up among them. 3 of the older horns were uprooted to make room for it. There were eyes in this horn like those of a man, and the mouth that spoke arrogantly. As I looked on, thrones were set in place. The Ancient of Days took his seat. His garment was like white snow. The hair of his head was like lamb's wool. His throne was tongues of flame. Its wheels were blazing fire. A river of fire streamed forth before him. Thousands upon thousands served him. Myriads upon myriads attended him. The court sat, and the books were opened. So it's almost as if Daniel takes Ezekiel and says, that's not strange enough. We're going to really make this image strange. We're going to take these four-headed creatures, divide them, and give them even more characteristics that we should be afraid of them. I looked on, then because of the arrogant words that the horn spoke, the beast was killed as I looked on. Its body was destroyed and it was consigned to the flames. The dominion of the other beasts was taken away, but an extension of life was given to them for a time and season. As I looked on in the night vision, one like a human being came with the clouds of heaven. He reached the Ancient of Days and was presented to him. Dominion, glory, and kingship were given to him. All peoples and nations of every language must serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship one that shall not be destroyed. This is where Christians love Daniel, because they read that passage as this is Jesus. This is Jesus getting his marching papers from the Ancient of Days. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was disturbed within me, and the vision of my mind alarmed me. I approached one of the attendants and asked him the true meaning of all this. He gave this interpretation of the matter. These great beasts, four in number, mean four kingdoms, will arise out of the earth. Then the holy ones of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess the kingdom forever, forever and ever. Then I wanted to ascertain the true meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all of them, very fearsome, with teeth of lion, claws of bronze, that devoured and crushed and stamped the remains and the 10 horns on his head, and of the new one that sprouted to make room for 3 which fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke arrogantly and which was more conspicuous than its fellows. I looked on as that horn made war with the holy ones and overcame them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was rendered in favor of the holy ones of the Most High. For the time had come and the holy ones took possession of the kingdom. This is what he said. The fourth beast means there will be a fourth kingdom upon the earth, which will be different from all the kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, tread it down and crush it. And the 10 horns mean from that kingdom 10 kings will arise, and after them another will arise. He will be different from the former ones and will bring low 3 kings. He will speak words against the Most High, will harass the holy ones of the Most High. He will think of changing times and laws, and they will be delivered into his power for a time, times and half a time. Then the court will sit and his dominion will be taken away, to be destroyed and abolished for all time. The kingship and dominion and grandeur belonging to all the kingdoms under heaven will be given to the people of the holy ones of the Most High. Their kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey them. Here the account ends. So, Daniel. Barbara's about to leave.
Well, that was like a prophecy.
It was like a
He
prophecy.
didn't get, he wasn't told to do anything. He like he
Right.
saw the future in this image.
Right. Daniel's not considered a prophet. This is considered wisdom literature. What kind of wisdom do we draw from this? Daniel is used a lot in eschatological texts, end of days kind of imagery, like the book of Revelations, does for the New Testament, Daniel somehow does for the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible. And so Daniel is a strange book to begin with because it's written in a hybrid language. It's part Aramaic and part Hebrew. So a lot of traditional Hebrew in the text is really Aramaic. And that changes the context of the book. Why is it in Aramaic? Because it was probably written that way because that was the language people understood.
It was a popular language at the time.
But these images are very powerful, and they become the embedded images of mystical tradition. And every mystical text from the 2nd century on uses bits and pieces of these images. And here's an example. So Sefer Yetzirah, which is the mystical text dealing with the book of creation, suggests that God created by having 2 wheels. One wheel like that, one wheel like that. And the wheels turned independently, like the wheels on the feet of the images in Ezekiel. And while Ezekiel says that along the rim of the wheel there were eyes, Sefer Yetzirah says around the rim were the Hebrew letters. And each one had those Hebrew letters. And the wheels would turn independently of each other. And when the wheel collided, letters were combined. And that spark shot out. And that thing, whatever it was, came into being. And that's how God created. So if God created by speaking, did God speak things in his head? Or did God have a tool, which becomes very important, through which God could create? So, that's why I said that phrase of Ra, Kid, Dab, Ra, is really important. What is it? Abracadabra. And it means in Aramaic, I will create as I speak. And so God, the mystics understood in Sefer Yetzirah that we're going to take the wheels from Ezekiel, and this is how God is going to create. And God's going to understand what to say because we're going to match a gimel and a bet and get the word gav, and so let there be a roof, and that's how things came into being. That's one example. So the other example comes in these creatures as guardians. So where I did my rabbinic thesis was on a section of mystical tradition called the Merkava tradition. Merkava and Hechalot are 2 different traditions. Hechalot seven hechalot. Seven hechalot. Hechalot are temples. Okay? So that there were 7 temples. The Merkavah mystics said that there are 7 heavens, and you need a chariot to get there. And so, who is our big chariot person in Judaism? We read this story not too long ago in our Haftorah. Elijah. So Elijah is the big chariot person. Elijah gets on this fiery chariot, never dies. Fiery chariot goes to the heavens. Mystical tradition says if Elijah can do it, why can't we? Where's my fiery chariot? Well, let's be like Elijah and create this fiery chariot, and we'll get through the 7 heavens. The 7 hechalot, the hechalots of Ezekiel, have these guardians. And there's a whole system of angelic beings that serve as guardians at the at the gates of every one of these temples. And so the mystics said, in order to make this journey, whether it's in a chariot or it's past these guardians, you have to know something. You have to be prepared. How do you get prepared? You get prepared by study. What do you study? You study law. You study the mitzvot. You study the images of Ezekiel and Daniel and Isaiah. You try to comprehend what they saw. You read the story of the garden, the Pardes we read last time, about the 4 rabbis who entered the garden. And you try to learn that to be careful of the things that you see. So in my translation of Hechalot Rabbati, which I did for my rabbinic dissertation, there is one place along the journey at the gateway to the 6th heaven that there are 4 angels, and if you don't call them by their proper name, it says in the mystical literature, 10,000 steel rods will fall on your head. And so the rabbis are sitting at a table like this. One person is the journeyer, and the other people are there as their guardians to pull them out of their mystical experience should they stumble. How do they pull them out of it? Shake them, bring them back to reality, or guide them by feeding them the right information. And that's where the mystical tradition really unfolds. And that's why it's...
But these people were alone.
These people were alone. So the prophets, these images are all singular kind of moments. But it's what the rest of Judaism did with them that really creates the mystical tradition. So how were these mystical experiences created? Through meditation. If you can imagine 10 people sitting around focusing on the words to the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And there's a very old and very traditional meditation on the Shema where it uses the letters Yud, He, Vav, He, God's name, as the meditative image. And it's embedded in a lot of the mystical literature that the mystics would sit around to create, kind of like a word find. Let's get Yud, He, Vav, He and see how many words we can make from those 4 letters, combining them into new words. And that's one of the tasks that the mystics would do, and it sounds a little pediatric to do something like that. But that was their key, to put them in the mindset to imagine how the letters come alive, and then begin to form the images that these people saw. There were incantations. The recitation of angelic names is amazing. People say, oh, there's no angels in Judaism, that's Christian. And that's nonsense, because there are. There's a long angelic tradition in Judaism, mainly embedded in the mystical tradition, where angels were seen as the guardians of each of the Hechalot. And if you didn't get their names right, terrible things could happen. Yeah, and things like losing one's mind, sanity. Not physical harm, although there are recorded, images of physical harm coming to people undertaking mystical journeys without the proper training. And then the biggest thing that was important for the mystics is sleep deprivation. Most of these visions happened after hours and hours and hours of meditation and incantations, and like going all night, studying all night, focusing all night, so that at the cusp of dawn, they would have this brief moment, and it would be over in a heartbeat. And then the next day, they would try it all again. It was a constant endeavor. And you're always starting at the bottom again. You never get to start at the top just because you did it once. And so they were constantly trying to recall, remember that image of mystical time, where they had started and where they had ended. So that's really important. I think we're going to stop there. I think what I want to get us focused on is less about the background, which I think we now have a little bit more of, and more about the product. What happens to the mystic when he has a mystical experience? So next time we're going to look at some mystical testimonies.
So these are much later.
Yeah, these will be much later.
It's the 22nd?
Not next.
Not next
Next
week.
week, next week, yes.
Next week's Pesach, so 2 weeks from tonight.
What would be the contribution